Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 3, Episode 12. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
Well, Steve, today on this episode, we have not one, but two amazing guests. We have Neil Saunders from Global Data and the one and only Mezzinga from Omni Talk. And they're both here to talk about the fault in our stores.
Yeah, I think, fault in our stores is a subchapter of my book. So, in terms of shamelessly promoting it, I wanted to get that in there. But I thought it would be good for us to go from kind of the higher level long-term strategy stuff and talk in some detail about some of the things that retailers can do in the short term to drive their business. And even if they're working on a long-term transformation, you got to pay the bills along the way. So bringing in Neil and Ann to talk about that, I think they've got some pretty good tips and pretty good observations.
All right. Well, we'll get to that in a bit. First of all, of course, we do kind of our hot takes news of the week, and a reminder to the listeners and or the viewers that this episode and a bit of extended bonus content is available on our YouTube channel shortly after launch, not usually the same day, but shortly after launch. So don't forget and smash that subscribe button on YouTube so you don't miss a single episode or moment of our chitting and chatting. Well, let's jump in. Let's start about U.S. commerce sales report. Mostly some big stats, but the media seems to, as always, kind of look at it a different way than maybe you and I would. Thoughts on that?
This has been a thing for quite some time. So I haven't had a chance. We're recording this on Friday. The results just came, or the report just came out this morning. And the headline that the U.S. Commerce reported, as well as what the media is picking up on, is that sales were up, I think, 0.7% over last month. And the thing that's weird to me is just this obsession with month over month numbers. It's not something I ever paid attention to when I worked in retail. And, there's just all sorts of seasonal factors. I went back and looked, and September is always a bigger month than August, just like December is a huge month. And so there's really nothing in and of itself that's all that noteworthy. They do a drill down on various categories, and I think the headlines overall really are compared to last year. Sales continue to be strong across the board. Apparel's up a lot, but of course we're anniversarying some of the store closings and things like that. So I think we're going to have to pick apart really what this tells us about the future. But yeah, just this kind of focus on the month over month sales, I just think is funny. So maybe eventually the press will focus on the things that matter a little bit most. But I'm not that hopeful, since a number of us have been, you and I, others have been talking about this, had an exchange on Twitter this morning about it. I mean, it's kind of a multi-year thing, but it doesn't matter how much we whine about it. I don't think they're going to change.
No, and it's on both sides of the border. And my role back at Retail Council of Canada, media relations representing the industry, I'm like, why do you even focus on this? Like, no one else focuses on this, but I don't know. Maybe it just makes good headlines. As you say, we can't shake them loose, but we'll continue. We'll continue to try. So, speaking of stats, let's keep the lens aperture wide open. The U.S. released some stats for jobs for the month of August. What was interesting is the amount of people moving around. What's going on?
Well, it seems like the hashtags, we've got to have the great, the great acceleration, the great whatever. Now it's the Great Resignation. And there were, what was the number? I'm going to have to look here in my cheat sheet. 720,000 people in a month left their retail jobs, and almost 900,000 left the restaurant hospitality business. So we continue to hear, I was just at a conference yesterday where there's a lot of discussion about how hard it is to get people to fill all sorts of jobs, warehouse jobs, regular retail jobs, you name it. So it's putting a real stress on the system. I think a lot of it just has to do with there's lots of competition for labor. Wage rates are going up. And frankly, a lot of these service jobs are just not the most fun jobs on the planet. And so people are willing to move for a better schedule, better lifestyle for maybe another $1 or $2 an hour.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, there's nothing new about that. I mean, of course, resignations are not zero. So any time there's lots of movement at the very front lines of retail. I mean, some retailers are like 50% at the stores.
Yeah, it's
churn.
Right.
So
retail's a kind of noted high churn business. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you're Walmart and you got a million people, you basically, if you think about it, it's kind of mind-boggling. On any given year, you got to replace 400,000 of them just from resignations alone, right? Not even talking about growth. And
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a little bit hard to put that in complete context, but I certainly am hearing from people I talk to in the industry, clients, et cetera, that there just is such a war for talent that's been at a level
Yeah.
that we haven't seen. And so I think it's part of this whole narrative. You know, we've got the supply chain challenges that everybody now
Hmm.
is talking about. We got inflation. There's just a lot of factors that are making retail
Yeah.
especially difficult for who knows how long. I guess we'll see when some of this stuff starts to bust loose or settle down.
Yeah, when I dig into it, ask myself the five whys, like what's changed, what's different. I there's some clues from Britain, right? So we're reading about Britain. It's very bad there because they, in the soccer world, they did an own goal basically when they put
Yeah,
in Brexit. A million people left, and they've
right.
got no truck drivers. They're slaughtering animals in the fields because they've got no one to process them. They just did this ask for like 800 butchers, and they give them a 6 month thing. Like nobody's going to come anymore
Mm,
because they kicked everybody out, right? There's
yeah,
a lot of people from Europe who would come and work in England, right? Now they're all gone. And I think the same thing is happening in North America for different reasons because a lot of these jobs are great jobs for new Americans or new Canadians new
right.
to the country, and immigration levels are down because of COVID, not up. Now
Yes,
in Canada, I
right.
don't know what it looks like in the States. The Canadian government is actually committed to bringing in 400,000 immigrants next year,
Mm,
which is the most since like 1913. We
right.
usually hover around 300,000
Yeah.
to catch up. And we're having the same problem. There's no truck drivers. You can't, and these are typically jobs that are great jobs for new Canadians. And there's
Yeah.
just less of them. And I think that's a contributing factor. There's just the labor flow's been disrupted, right? Because
Yeah, no,
it just
there's
has,
a
right?
lot. There's a lot of complexity, and certainly we hear stories of people that would maybe like to go back to work, but they don't feel safe, or they can't get
Yep.
childcare, or So I think there's sometimes these overly
Hmm.
simplistic narratives as to what's
Yeah.
going on. It's a little bit more
Yeah.
complicated than that, or you have to peel back onto the political agenda that might be
Yeah.
behind some of the pronouncements. But
Yeah.
it's certainly a really really challenging time, and the thing I keep coming back to is how do we line up these very robust forecasts for the holiday, 7, 8, 9% sales growth when you may not be able to schedule the workers to take care of the business, you may not have the product. So I don't know. I
Mm.
still wonder whether that demand and supply side really can line up as well
That's
as
a great
some people
question.
seem to think, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a great question. I guess we should talk about inflation a little bit. There's a retailer, great retailer called Lee Valley Tools in Canada, and Robin Lee put out a note to his customers yesterday and said, and just laid it out and said, I used to pay $7,000 for a container that now costs me $34,000,
Right.
and basically saying, A, this is hard, and B, expect trouble,
Hmm.
shortages, and C, eventually the merchants and vendors, they can't absorb those kind of costing. It's an input cost. It's not the final cost, but
Oh,
I
no,
got
but
to think
it's
inflation, it could be pretty pernicious for the next 18 months.
Yeah, it's hard for me to understand how long this is going to last. I certainly have heard people say we're in for a pretty long ride here, but yeah, between the transportation costs, between the labor issues, yeah, some of that's got to get passed on to the consumer,
Yeah.
and how that will affect demand, I think, is and just profitability in general. You've got kind of this weird dynamic. I think we talked about this maybe last week or the week before in terms of the sales forecast. Is normally when we're talking about the holiday sales, it's really kind of if sales are up 4%, it's because units are up about 4%. But this time, there may be more of the sales gains
Could be
that come
price
from
too.
average unit retail going up. And
Mm.
also because of the shortage of products, generally, we're not seeing, at least so far, nearly the kind of promotional activity. So retailers are going to benefit from gross margins being higher than they might otherwise be. So how that all mixes out, and when it starts to revert to some semblance of normalcy, hard to tell. But I do think we're in for kind of a long ride in terms of all these different factors. Because some of the issues we're talking about this off mic, some of the
Mm.
transportation related issues are not so easily fixed. You just can't
Yeah.
muscle your way through some of these supply chain challenges, because sometimes it's production issues because stuff's not getting made. Sometimes it's shipping
Yep.
issues, the trucking shortage, the unloading labor. Like, it's a complicated supply chain, and any default along the way or any stress along the way can mess the whole thing up. It's not like you fix the shipping thing and suddenly everything's back to normal.
Right. I think, and there's probably a whole episode on this, and neither, you and I have been both in retail long enough to know a little bit about supply chain, but I think what's behind it, if we think about it, is the drive to reduce costs to the absolute penny in the supply chain. So that's where you get
Right.
bigger boats carrying more
Yep.
stuff, more efficient. You don't have receiving docks building because they just want, they want to be very efficient. And I think that, this could have a long-term systematic issue. Now, at the same time, the old saying, you don't build a church for Christmas. These ports are saying, well, like, why would I double my port capacity today when in, pick a number, 2-3 years, it goes back to normal and I got
Right.
a lot of excess port capacity, right? So,
Yeah,
this too
you're
shall
totally
pass,
right.
really.
Well, it's like a lot of things, I think, in retail. We've sort of created various monsters. To your point, in the push for just-in-time inventory
Well
flow,
put.
lower cost, we built this whole system.
Yeah.
But when it derails massively. Um,
Yeah.
we built this monster around, it's a whole other topic, right? But just teaching customers to buy stuff on sales. We've created returns problems by liberal return policies. So, yeah, you got to be careful what you
Yeah.
wish for and what you're solving for. So I think this is going to be, at least on the supply chain side, it's going to be more muscling through it for whatever time, and then maybe dealing with more kind of infrastructure kinds of issues. But yeah, I don't think there's a simple solution to it, unfortunately.
All right, let's pick up on some other news. Netflix partners with Walmart. That's interesting. Talk about that.
Well, this and this is another. I keep coming up with episode ideas, but the way so many retailers are really
By the way.
becoming more platforms as opposed to retail in a traditional sense. I mean, obviously, Amazon is the one we talk about the most with all these diverse revenue streams, and in many cases, it's less about selling product. But if you look at what Walmart's doing, from delivering product for other people to now partnering with Netflix to create merchandise that's associated with the streaming service. I mean, it's just always sort of interesting combinations in way people are monetizing their brand, monetizing the relationship that they have with the customer, monetizing the traffic to their website. So this is, I suspect, part of a number of these kind of content partnerships we'll see. So they haven't released a ton of detail on it, I don't think, but I think it's an interesting trend to watch.
Yeah, I'll put a link to there's a landing page that they put out that starts to stitch together product and content. And so I've read through it once or twice. So I think I'm just getting my head around it, but I'll put a link in for the folks to kind of check out for themselves, because it's kind of interesting, right? All these connections are interesting, as you said, platform discussions. So there's this new organization, and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce it right. Viori.
Yeah, it's a brand. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure the pronunciation. Viori, I think.
Viori.
And this is a brand that's 5 or 6 years old. Actually, first
What?
got them on my radar screen because Jim Gold, who I used to work with at Neiman Marcus, he ran Bergdorf Goodman for a while. I believe he's on the board of Viori, and he's now taking a CEO job at another company. But it's basically a athleisure brand. So at one level is not so different than a lot of other products that are out there. But they made news this week because they raised $400 million, which is a pretty good amount of money to raise. And they said in their news release that they're one of the few profitable direct-to-consumer brands. So that's sort of interesting in and of themselves. And guess
Bold
what they're going to
statement.
do?
It's a bold
Guess what
statement.
they're going to do with that $400 million, Michael? You'll never guess what they're planning to do with that.
Go to space?
That was one of the things they're looking at as part of their longer term plan. They're going to open stores.
Stores, of
Yeah, you
course,
were so
stores.
close. You were so close. You had it there. I thought when you started with yes. Yes, they're going to go from, I think they have maybe a dozen stores now. I think they're all pretty much in California where they started. And they're planning to open stores around the US as well as internationally. So, yeah, they kind of came out of nowhere, but they've been growing really nicely. And like I say, allegedly profitable, and they've got some cash in the till to go on a massive expansion plan. So it's just funny. I feel like every week we're talking about some sort of capital markets activity on the party's digitally native vertical brands, and parsing through the profitability and seeing that actually maybe physical retail isn't dead.
Well, as we often do, let's talk about Amazon for a little bit. They've started to open their 4-star
talk about
stores
Amazon,
in
Michael.
the UK. Yeah, let's just bring them up.
Okay.
They're opening their 4-star stores in the UK. Now, you and I have talked about their 4-star stores.
Yes.
My only curiosity about the 4-star stores, why they suck so bad. Like, right, they're not a great store.
Right. Well, first of all, it's false advertising, right? It's
money.
really like it's a 1-star store when you really think about it.
It's like they're not short of money, talent, initiative, but anyway. So they're opening, I guess, in the UK, their 4-star concept.
Well, there are a couple of things that are interesting. I agree with you. I think the Amazon 4-star stores are very underwhelming, and I am surprised that they are not better. But they quietly keep expanding them, and I guess they weren't so quiet about the announcement that they're going to the UK. One of the things that was in this story was how they're going to be using these stores, kind of like we've talked about with Nordstrom Local, that they are going to be much more explicitly online pickup, buy online pickup in store, buy online return to store. So there might be a bit of a stealthy strategy here to have kind of a fulfillment, a little more overtly a fulfillment component or omni service, whatever you want to call it, to these stores. That's also rumored to be part of what's behind their so-called department store offering that's going to be coming out. So I think they're playing around with a number of these different formats. Some of it is definitely creating a physical space to promote product, but I suspect the service side of this is the bigger story. But we'll have to see whether this new store looks much different than the U.S. stores, or whether they start doing anything different in the U.S. One to watch, I think, but certainly as a interesting physical retail concept, it's not very interesting.
Yeah, and I've been in. To be fair, I haven't been in the Amazon 4-star in New York since I haven't been to New York. I went to the Soho one, and very underwhelming. But I like this idea. If it's a place to drop off and pick off, certainly you wouldn't do that in that store. It's crowded, and you don't have, be harder. You basically have to step outside to change your mind in that store. It's so crowded, like old school, right? Anyway, all right. Well, listen. Let's get to our fantastic interview all about stores. So great transition to talking about stores with Neil Saunders from Global Data and Mezzinga for Omni Talk.